Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
7:07. It's O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in this Tuesday morning in your nation's capital, 8th day of April. By the way, happy birthday to Dennis Paul O'Connor Sr. My father would have been 88 years old today. Aww. Still keeping his memory strong here, as we just lost him a month ago. He was so close to hitting double eight, but we lost him a month ago. But happy birthday, Dad. Coming up at 7:35, Nick Minnock, WJLA, on a scandal that should end Steve Descano's career. Not only did he leave a accused abuser of his ex-wife, who has been in the country illegally multiple times, deported multiple times, was arrested for strangulation. Not only did he let him off with a slap on the wrist, but he lied and said that that's what his ex-wife, the victim, wanted. That victim has told Nick Minnock a different story, and we're going to get to the bottom of that. Also at 8:05, Frederick County Sheriff Chuck Jenkins. That is Julie. Julie, good morning. You look fabulous as always.
Oh, thank you.
And joining us right now, also fabulous as always, is Gordon Chang. His book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, couldn't be more timely. Of course, you want to follow him, as we all do, on the X platform. That would be Gordon G. Chang. The G stands for greatness. Gordon, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Larry and Julie.
I think very smart observers of the president's rollout of tariff policies last week have honed in specifically on China. Our mutual friend Katie McFarland, a regular guest on our show, said that on Thursday, said China, China, China. That's what this is about. That's why we wanted to talk to you. China responded over the weekend with retaliatory tariffs, which is hilarious because our tariffs were retaliatory. They were reciprocal. Now Trump is threatening. Well, here's Trump yesterday, Gordon, and then I'll let you comment on it. Go ahead with cut 10, please.
Put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. And I said, if that tariff isn't removed by tomorrow at 12 o'clock, we're putting a 50% tariff on above the tariffs that we put on. So they've gone for years. They've become a rich country because of people, again, that were in the White House that allowed this to happen. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year they'd make on us on trade, and it shouldn't be that way. And I have a great relationship with President Xi. I hope it's going to stay that way. I have great respect for China, but they can't do this. We're going to have one shot at this, and no other president's going to do this, what I'm doing. And I'll tell you what, it's an honor to do it because we have been just destroyed. What they've done to our system. You know, we have $36 trillion of debt for a reason. And the reason is that people allowed it to get that way. So,
all right. Trump. I do love that Trump always says, and I have a great relationship with President Xi. I know that matters, that kind of diplo negotiating talk. Gordon, take it away and take your time. If we have to carry over for a second segment, we will. It's important. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with President Trump down the line on this. There was an unspoken message, and that is President Trump told the Chinese that he will not be intimidated. You know, Beijing doesn't have any ammunition in this trade war. They're the smaller economy. They're the one with all the trade surpluses, $295.4 billion last year. That was up 5.8% from 2023. And that means the only way that China can win this trade war is that President Trump backs down, even though he holds all the high cards. Well, yesterday, in that clip you just played, President Trump told the Chinese, I'm not being intimidated, I'm not backing down, you're going to lose. So that was a very important message for Beijing to hear.
And if you could add to this, because a part of what the Trump administration has done here is not just the reciprocal tariffs, but they're constantly talking about currency manipulation and other sort of non-tariff barriers. Can you expand on that a little bit with regard to what China's policies have been?
Yeah, China is basically a predatory and criminal trader. It hasn't honored its trade commitments when it joined the World Trade Organization. It's violated its trade agreement with President Trump, the so-called Phase 1 trade deal of January 2020. what China does is not only tariffs, but the most important thing, as you point out, are the non-tariff barriers. These are the secret instructions that Beijing issues to its ministries, to its state enterprises, and to others to, for instance, do not buy American goods, don't buy foreign goods. And there's a whole bunch of things that China does through those secret instructions. And also just the rules that it has about restricting foreign purchases and others. Some of them are even on the books. So really what we have got is a whole system which is designed to be that predatory trader. And that's why China racks up these enormous trade surpluses. You know, China accounts for almost half of the world's trade surpluses. That is not the result of natural trading relations. That's the result of China's predatory policies. And, you know, it's been on us, you know, Larry and Julie, that we've allowed this to continue. Yeah. You know, we could stop this, and only President Trump, he's the first person to say, I'm not putting up with this anymore. So when he says this is an historic opportunity, he's not kidding. He's absolutely right about that. And the American people, whether they like Trump or not, and I love him, but the point is, even if you don't like him, he's the only president we have. He's the only person who's going to defend us against the Chinese regime's predatory tactics. And if you don't like it, that's tough. But we're Americans, and we've got a common enemy right now, and Trump is the only one who can defend us.
Gordon, talk to us a little bit about China's economy. You know, China itself, it's a bit of a paper dragon. I don't know much about the Chinese economy, but I do know it is not as strong as they would have Americans believe. Why are they really not on good footing to start this trade war with the Americans?
Well, first of all, their economy didn't grow 5.0% as they reported for last year. It was probably maybe 1%, if that. And right now they're at about zero, a little bit above, a little bit below, we don't know. But the price information, they're in a deflationary spiral. All the rest of it indicates it's an extremely weak economy. But there are two things that make it even worse. First of all, even if it were growing at 5.0, it would not be growing fast enough to retire debt that it's accumulated. And second of all, Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the fundamental basis of the Chinese economy. So his only way out of this predicament is to export more, and the world isn't going to accept more Chinese exports. So there is no good outcome for the Chinese economy right now. The Chinese know it, and when the Commerce Ministry a few hours ago said it would fight to the end, well, it's pretty close to the end.
All right, let's follow up on that in 60 seconds because, you know, as rough as it's been for our stock market, although yesterday, if you were in the NASDAQ, you actually saw green at the end of the day, not nearly the disaster everyone predicted at the opening bell. It was even worse for China, where Sunday night, I think they dropped 12% in one day. Can that be sustained, and how is this going to affect the people of China who are ultimately victims here as well? We'll get all of that and more with Gordon Chang in just a moment. First, though, it's 7:15.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
We continue with Gordon Chang here. Again, talking about China, his book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, we are seeing play out here. Trump instituted his tariff plan last week. Most observers recognize that this was really specifically about China. And the markets on both sides of the Pacific have reacted, but China much more drastically. The China stock market overnight, Sunday night into yesterday morning, dropped 12%. It basically closed flat, down a little bit. It's down overall 4% in the past week. Gordon, it's funny to talk about an authoritarian, totalitarian, communist government and their stock exchange, but does that matter to anyone other than the select few who have been anointed by Beijing to be allowed to own capital and invest? How does this affect the Chinese people, and will this manifest in some kind of pressure on the government to break?
Yeah, the Chinese people have generally turned their back on the Chinese stock markets for a number of reasons, and that's why they bought property. They view vacant flats as a store of value rather than stocks. You know, China has these high currency walls, so the Chinese people can't invest outside readily. And so what they have done is they have basically said no to equities, but yes to real estate. The stock exchange, which is measured by the CSI 300, basically is a signal to foreigners. And it dropped 7.0% a day ago. It was up like maybe 1.7 yesterday, but that was because of official policies. It's not because the Chinese institutions have become more bullish. They certainly haven't. But the government,
sorry to pause you there, real fast. That was basically the communist government stepped in and instituted some. Was it monetary policies or some sort of? They basically tinkered with their version of the Dow, right?
Absolutely. What they did was they authorized buybacks by companies. They had the insurance companies come in. Essentially, they had the sovereign wealth fund promise to buy stocks. So essentially, it was a government-engineered rally, and really does not reflect anything other than the government's willingness to even buy more privately owned shares.
Thank you. Got it.
Gordon, J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance tweeted the other day about how the Chinese should not own a single blade of grass. But the CCP's sort of infiltration into the United States, it isn't just in land ownership. They are all over the United States, and it is very concerning. When are we going to see this acted upon by the Trump administration? Obviously, J.D. Vance's statement shows a commitment to that, but when are we going to see some real action?
I think that we're going to see it fairly soon, and the reason is that this trade war is going to continue. The Chinese, Xi Jinping essentially has configured the Communist Party at the top so that only the most hostile and belligerent answers are considered acceptable, which means he's not going to give up the trade war. They're going to fight for a very long time. And that means, I think, that the struggle is going to go into other domains. So it will go into, for instance, Chinese ownership of farm and ranch land. It will go into Chinese ownership of shares, Chinese ownership of U.S. technology. All of these areas are open for further restrictions, which is what we have to do anyway. But I think it will occur pretty soon because this is a fight that isn't going to end anytime within the next several months.
Gordon Chang is our guest, and you should educate yourself on this issue so you're well versed. Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America is his book. That's a real good start in that education. Gordon, what is Beijing more worried about? Tariffs from President Trump and the cost of exporting all of those things that are manufactured there, or companies pulling out from their contract manufacturers and either manufacturing here at home or in other Pacific Rim countries? What hurts them more?
I think the tariffs do. And the reason is that Xi Jinping is happy to see some foreign companies leave because he believes that the Chinese market should be reserved for Chinese state enterprises. So when the foreigners
Wait a second. That sounds like Trump. I mean, why is it okay for them and not for America to say that?
Well, the tactics differ. President Trump uses more persuasion. The Chinese use criminal ways to force foreign companies off their soil. They don't want the foreign manufacturers at this stage to leave because of the trade war, but Xi Jinping privately smiles when they do go. The tariffs, though, are an existential matter because, as I mentioned, China's only way to rescue its economy is to export more. When Trump closes off the U.S. market, it's irreplaceable in the short and intermediate term. And it also means that other countries raise their tariff walls to Chinese products. So it's not just the United States. Trump is having an effect around the world because he's recognized that the rules-based trading order doesn't exist anymore. So every country is now starting to move for itself, and that puts China out in a very difficult place.
All right. Gordon, one last thing here. Anybody who's got family members or are themselves in the military, specifically the Navy and Marines, know that there's a mobilization right now for Pacific Rim exercises. This is sort of a regular U.S. military flexing their muscles, showing how we work with our allies there, but really to send a message to China that they shouldn't try anything. What's happening there? Because it seems like this year's version of this saber rattling is a little bit more intense and a little bit more deliberate. Am I reading that wrong?
Certainly in China, that is right, because Xi Jinping is mobilizing all of society, not just the military, but civilians. He's calling up reservists. He's basically expropriating privately owned factories to make materials for war. And we see the Chinese military engage in very, very belligerent activity with regard to South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, and that's just in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, and they're still on the record. I mean, their leaders, military leaders as well as civilian leadership, not that there's a big difference, said over a decade ago, they will own Taiwan. They are taking Taiwan, and there's just a timeline on that. The American military leaders know that. It's just that it seems like this is the first government in a while that's taking it seriously. Am I right about that?
Yes, well, Xi Jinping has staked his personal legitimacy on annexing Taiwan. I don't know if he's ready at this moment, but that's the reason why he's going after these other countries. But the point is, Xi Jinping has made it clear, as you say, that he's taking over Taiwan come hell or high water, whether it's peaceful or through the use of force. And because the people in Taiwan don't think they're Chinese, it's going to be through the use of force, and that means we need to stop them.
Thank you, Gordon. Always sobering and important, and I want to make sure that everyone who tunes into this show keeps their eye on what's really happening here with these tariffs and what the real narrative needs to continue to be. China is not our friend, and the sooner our American corporations recognize that, the better. Thank you, Gordon. Always good to talk with you.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Julie.
It is 7:24. Are you ready to take your plumbing career to the next level? O'Connor Plumbing, family-owned leader for over 70